Hi there, Andrew here, welcome to my channel on investing. You probably heard about Ozempic, which is a drug approved by the FDA in 2017 to treat type 2 diabetes. But many people use it for other purposes, mainly to lose weight.
Ozempic gained national attention for its weight loss potential in 2021. That was when the Dr. Oz show featured it. The rest is history. Celebrities and TikTok influencers took Ozempic and other obesity drugs to the moon.
In this video, let's take a deep dive into the world of obesity drugs. I will also pay special attention to stocks of companies that are selling or about to sell weight loss drugs.
First, let's quickly understand how these obesity drugs work. There are currently two major companies that produce obesity drugs. They are Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. Eli Lilly came up with a drug called Mounjaro for diabetes treatment. Its weight loss version is called Zepbound. Likewise, Novo Nordisk has semaglutide drugs. They are sold under the brand names of Ozempic or Rybelsus and Wegovy. Most of these drugs must be injected subcutaneously under the skin with a special pen. Novo and Eli are working on pills that can be taken orally too. This will likely make them even more popular. All these drugs are glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist, or GLP for short. Without getting too technical, here's how GLP works. Whenever we eat, a special hormone is released in our gut called incretin. Incretin decreases blood sugar levels by stimulating insulin production. GLP class drugs mimic actions of incretin. So those who take GLP drugs also experience lower appetite and want to eat less often. All this eventually leads to weight loss. Of course, these drugs come at a price of side effects. GLP significantly slows down the movement of food through the gut, causing unpleasant symptoms. Also, there were reports of people binge eating after they stopped taking medication. Some gained their weight back as a result.
Currently, there are many big pharma and biotech companies rushing to bring their own obesity drugs to the market, and the reasons are numerous. First, people are supposed to take these drugs long-term for weight management. Coming off them creates a risk of gaining everything back. So these drugs aren't like some other one-time treatments. People are supposed to take them long-term, or even better, indefinitely, bringing with them a recurring revenues streams. And that's the best outcome for pharma firms, financially speaking. Of course, these drugs come with their own side effects, but having excess weight puts people at risk of other major health problems. So for some, the benefit of taking these drugs can outweigh the cost by a wide margin. The second reason has to do with the growing rates of obesity around the world. Here are some eye-opening stats.
According to the World Health Organization, worldwide obesity has more than doubled since 1990. In 2022, 2.5 billion adults were overweight, which is 43% of all adults. Of this number, almost 900 million adults were obese. That is, 1 in 8 people globally are dealing with obesity every day. Obesity among children is also growing. Both Novo and Eli are working to get their weight loss drugs approved for adolescents use too. With sky-high obesity rates, the total addressable market is huge.
Novo and Eli sell their obesity drugs in the US and Europe, but many other countries took notice. For instance, India approved Rybelsus by Novo in 2022. Likewise, China approved Wegovy for weight loss in June of this year. Also, Eli Lilly saw its obesity drugs getting approvals in many major markets as well. Now, let's take a quick look at financial numbers for Novo and Eli to see how obesity drugs benefited these companies. Novo Nordisk is based in Sweden and is one of the largest companies by market capitalization in Europe.
Diabetes and obesity treatments account for around 90% of Novo's sales. Rare disease therapeutics take the rest. Novo is probably one of the few concentrated bets on diabetes and obesity drugs out there. Other pharmaceutical companies typically have a much wider portfolio of drugs. Novo's GLP obesity treatments had a 55% market share, while its insulin products for diabetes had 44% market share. Wegovy and similar obesity treatments took off from virtually nothing nothing in 2020 to over 40 billion Danish crowns in 2023. This is around $6 billion, accounting for roughly 18% of Novo's total sales. That's a huge growth, which is still in its infancy. Novo's operating margins remained more or less the same for the past 10 years, around 40 to 45%. But its return on invested capital tells a very different story. It skyrocketed from around 50 to over 70%. What does it mean? It means that Novo deploys a relatively smaller capital to generate the same amount of profits. Sales growth rates also took off to unprecedented levels for a company of this size. Recently, Novo clocked 36% growth rate in sales on a constant currency exchange rate. But growth in returns will likely subside going forward. Novo remained constrained in its production to supply obesity drugs to the market. The company went on a spending spree by building new facilities around the world. In 2023, its capital expenditures to sales ratio spiked to 11%, meaning that Novo spent 11% of its sales on various capital projects. Many of these projects are due to be completed in the next 2 to 3 years. Such financial performance didn't go unnoticed. The stock price soared, producing massive trailing returns, especially over the last year. Based on various relative valuation metrics, Novo is priced at its peak. For instance, its enterprise value to operating profits multiple stands at over 36. This is almost double of its historic numbers. But sales growth rates are very different today too, as we see. They used to be sub 10%, but now it's over 20% or even 30%. So one can argue that such a high multiple is justified. The question is whether Novo will be able to sustain this breakneck growth or not.
Many of Novo's patents for GLP treatments are set to expire in 2030 or around that time. In China, they are set to expire even earlier in 2026. This can bring generic competition. Generic competition typically lowers prices, forcing Novo and other companies to lower their prices. Although one may argue that it may or may not be that easy for generic producers to copy obesity drugs that Novo and others produce. But regardless of this, the obesity drugs remain pricey for an average person.
For instance, here's some data from August 2023 on how much 1 month supply of semaglutide treatment costs. The US leads all other countries in comparison.
What's interesting is that many health insurance in the US do not cover obesity drugs, and Medicaid or Medicare in many states do not cover Wegovy for cosmetic weight loss. But pharma companies know this and they figure out a back end to get coverage for obesity drugs. The thing is that obesity is associated with many other health complications. Type 2 diabetes is an obvious one, but there are many others, such as cardiovascular problems or sleep apnea. Novo and Eli created many studies that are aiming to show that GLP products can improve those health outcomes. After all, if a person loses excess weight, those health problems can vanish or at least subside.
For instance, in 2023, Novo Nordisk established that Wegovy can reduce the risk of heart attack or stroke. Likewise, Eli Lilly just announced results from its clinical studies of Zepbound. They found that Zepbound reduces the severity of sleep apnea. Over 50% of study participants resolved their apnea.
Now, that's a very different matter. Medicaid and Medicare and other health insurance plans are more likely to cover obesity drugs in such instances. If, for instance, a person was refused to get coverage for obesity drugs for weight loss, now he can take a roundabout route. If, for instance, he has cardiovascular problems or sleep apnea, he can request Wegovy and get coverage for it, because now we have these studies that prove that it helps. In fact, this is exactly how these companies are building competitive advantage in economic mode for their obesity drugs. They sponsor multi-year studies that prove that obesity drugs help with many other health problems other than weight loss. And this is exactly what makes it very hard for new entrants to compete and outcompete Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly.
The other company currently competing with Novo Nordisk is Eli Lilly. You may know it by its antidepressant and antipsychotic drugs such as Prozac or Zyprexa. Like Novo, Eli is reliant on diabetes and obesity drugs, which accounted for over 60% of its revenues in 2023. Its best-selling drugs are Trulicity and Mounjaro, which are both used to treat type 2 diabetes and use GLP as its active ingredient. However, Mounjaro was often used for weight loss off-label. In 2023, Eli launched Zepbound in the US, which is marketed specifically for weight loss. For now, its sales are meager but will take off. Very likely, Zepbound will cannibalize some of Mounjaro's sales as people switch. The other 40% of Eli's sales come from oncology, immunology, and neuroscience drugs. Besides Mounjaro and Zepbound, an immunology drug Taltz and cancer treatment drug Verzenio hold the biggest sales potential for Eli Lilly. Similar to Novo, Eli is massively profitable, although maybe not as high as Novo. Here's a side-by-side comparison of Novo and Eli. We see that the sales growth rate for Eli accelerated with the introduction of Mounjaro. One interesting note on Eli Lilly versus Novo Nordisk is this: Eli spends much more on research and development compared to Novo or other pharma companies. This could partly explain why its returns and profitability metrics lag behind Novo. Also, Eli has relative multiples of stratospheric proportions. We may argue why that is, but it's very likely due to a robust pipeline of drugs and clinical studies that Eli is pursuing on many fronts. But Novo Nordisk and Eli will not be the only players in town in 5 or so years. Many other companies are aiming to produce their own obesity drugs. Here are a few examples. First is Pfizer. Pfizer is working on a once-daily oral pill called dinoglipron. I have no idea who comes up with these complicated names for drugs, but they surely sound weird. Oral pills are the future for obesity drugs, not injections. They are more convenient and easier to administer. Currently, dinoglipron is in phase 2 clinical trial, showing promising results. Judging by the average approval time, Pfizer may get this drug on the market by 2028 or later. Second is Amgen. Amgen is working on a drug called AMG 133. The company also has other weight loss drugs in phase 1 preclinical studies. As for AMG 133, Amgen wants to develop a drug that patients can take once a month. The phase 2 results from the AMG 133 drug should be ready sometime by the end of 2024 or early 2025. So far, little is known about AMG 133 progress, so it's a big unknown at this point. The third big pharma working on obesity drug is Roche from Switzerland. Roche shares jumped in July on news that its weight loss drug CT996 showed promising results in phase 1 trial. The company intends to use CT996 drug for treating both type 2 diabetes and obesity. Another much smaller company working on obesity drugs is Viking Therapeutics. Viking's VK2735 drug is undergoing phase 1 trials or getting close to phase 2 trials for both oral and subcutaneous uses. The drug showed promising results and will likely transition to phase 2 trials at the end of this year. Viking is a small and unprofitable biotech company, unlike its bigger pharma counterparts, so it's more speculative compared to established players, but with higher risk you may get a bigger upside or downside. Finally, here I have two more honorable mentions. These are Structure Therapeutics and Altimmune. Again, both are small and unprofitable biotech companies, also pursuing similar GLP-1 therapeutics. Overall, we see that many companies are pursuing obesity treatments, and their treatments are using the same or similar mechanisms that Novo and Eli Lilly are using and selling currently on the market. So very likely in a matter of 5 or 6 years, there will be more competition. And it may seem like the end for Novo and Eli, but it's not. Both companies are working on improving the efficacy of their drugs by combining them with other chemical ingredients. Also, they are working on more novel and better delivery mechanisms, also improving their efficiency. And this creates the opportunity to file for patents that can extend the protection for profits. So the new entrants will have a very hard time to dethrone this duopoly.
Finally, other countries will approve obesity drugs after successful clinical trials. Looking at total addressable market, I see a lot of disagreement among analysts. After all, even small changes in usage rates create large differences in total addressable market and valuation for these stocks. But one thing is for sure, obesity drugs proved that they work. And that is it for this video. I hope you found it informative if you are thinking of investing in obesity drug stocks. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more actionable insight and content on investing. Thank you for watching.